In the gilded heart of the celestial spire, the towering palace of the Valari dominion, a silence thick as velvet draped over the grand hall of accord. Sunlight, filtered through prisms of living crystal embedded in the vaulted ceiling, painted shifting constellations across marble floors veined with starlight ore. Courtiers in iridescent silks stood frozen like statues, their breaths held as Queen Lorana of Valor sat upon her throne of fused moonstone and bioluminescent coral. She was regal, ethereal, and unmistakably alien. Her skin the deep cobalt of twilight oceans, her long, silver-white hair cascading like liquid frost over shoulders draped in robes woven from comet trails. Her eyes, luminous pools of violet, watched the procession of diplomats with detached grace, though her fingers betrayed a subtle tremor as they traced the rim of a ceremonial chalice. Among the sea of foreign envoys stood a human named Corin Vale. Unlike the others, whose entourages swelled with aides, translators, and armored guards, Corin stood alone, dressed in the simple charcoal-gray uniform of the Terran Concord's cultural attaché corps. He wasn't a soldier, not exactly. Once a field medic during the Sandfire campaign on Xylos 7, he traded plasma rifles for protocol manuals after saving the life of a Valari diplomat caught in a rebel ambush. For that act, he'd been granted rare access to the inner sanctums of Valari politics. Still, no one truly expected him to be here today, not at the Feast of Binding, a sacred ritual marking the renewal of interstellar pacts and, secretly, the Queen's annual tasting of the sovereign sustenance, a dish said to bind her life force to the health of her people. Corin shifted his weight, his boots scuffing softly against the polished floor. He'd studied Valari customs for months, but something about the air today felt off. The usual ambient hum of the palace's biosynthetic walls carried a dissonant note, like a single out-of-tune string in a symphony. His gaze drifted past the glittering delegates to the royal dais, where servants in obsidian masks carried in the sovereign sustenance, a dish of iridescent fungi, crystallized nectar, and powdered moon petal, arranged in the shape of a blooming nebula. It shimmered faintly, exhaling a scent like honey and ozone. Beautiful, deadly if tampered with. He remembered something from his medic days, a report buried in classified archives about a rare neurotoxin derived from Xylosian blister moss. It mimicked the sovereign sustenance's natural aroma but induced paralysis within minutes, followed by neural decay. The toxin left no trace in standard scans, unless you knew to look for the faint luminescent shimmer it gave off under certain light frequencies. And there it was, flickering along the edge of the fungi, almost invisible beneath the dish's own glow. Corin's stomach clenched. He wasn't supposed to speak. Protocol forbade unsanctioned address to the Queen during the feast. But if that dish reached her lips, before he could second-guess himself, Corin stepped forward. Not with the rigid formality of an ambassador, but with the urgent, limping stride of a man who'd carried wounded across sandstorms. A gasp rippled through the court. Guards tensed, hands hovering over pulse blades. But Corin didn't stop until he stood 3 paces from the dais, close enough to see the fine silver lashes framing Lorana's eyes, close enough to smell the faint floral musk of her ceremonial oils. "Don't eat that food," he whispered, voice low and urgent, pitched so only she could hear over the hushed orchestra of the hall. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Queen Lorana's violet eyes widened just slightly, but it was enough. Her hand, which had been reaching for the silver-tasting spoon, stilled midair. She turned her head slowly, studying Corin not with outrage, but with a quiet, piercing intensity that made his skin prickle. Then, with deliberate grace, she set the spoon down and gestured for silence with a raised palm. The chamber obeyed instantly, as if the very air had been vacuumed away. "Rise, Terran," she said, her voice a melody layered with ancient echoes. "You have interrupted a sacred rite. Explain yourself, or face the consequences of sacrilege." Corin swallowed hard but stood straighter. "Your Majesty, that dish, it's been contaminated with blister moss toxin. It'll paralyze your central nervous system in under 5 minutes. I saw the luminescent residue under the prism light." A murmur erupted, quickly silenced by a glare from the royal guard captain. Lorana didn't flinch. Instead, she lifted the dish with one slender hand and held it up to the light streaming from the ceiling. Her expression remained unreadable, but Corin noticed the subtle tightening of her jaw. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she hurled the plate to the floor. It shattered with a sound like breaking glass, and the contents sizzled faintly as they hit the stone. "Search the kitchens," she commanded, her voice colder than orbital ice. "Find who prepared this, and bring them to me, alive." Panic surged through the court. Delegates exchanged frantic glances. Several envoys from the rival Crithian hegemony looked particularly pale. Corin knew why. The hegemony had long coveted Velari territory, and poisoning the queen during a diplomatic feast would destabilize the entire quadrant. Before he could process what had happened, Lyrana rose from her throne and descended the dais steps. She stopped inches from Corin, close enough that he could see the faint tracery of bioluminescent veins beneath her blue skin, pulsing gently with her heartbeat. She studied him for a long moment, then said, "You risked your life for mine, human. Why?" Corin gave a small, crooked smile. "Call it professional habit, your majesty. Can't watch someone eat poison and do nothing. Especially not after carrying half your diplomats out of sandpits last year." A flicker of something, amusement, crossed her face. "Corin Vale," she said, using his full name as if tasting it. "You are either the bravest fool in the galaxy, or the most inconvenient savior." What followed wasn't punishment, but elevation. Lyrana declared Corin under her personal protection, assigning him quarters within the palace's azure wing, a place usually reserved for family or honored war heroes. The court buzzed with speculation. Was he a spy? A lover? Political pawn? Corin himself didn't know what he was. He spent his days navigating labyrinthine corridors lined with floating gardens and whispering statues, trying to decipher Velari politics while dodging assassination attempts disguised as accidents. A malfunctioning lift, a venomous orchid in his bathing chamber, a data slug that nearly electrocuted him. Each time, Lyrana intervened. Once, she appeared in his rooms unannounced, her white hair unbound, wearing simple linen instead of royal robes, carrying a tray of fruit that she insisted he eat first to prove it was safe. Another time, she summoned him to the sky garden, where vines bloomed with starlight blossoms, and asked him questions about Earth, about rain, about snow, about why humans wrote songs about heartbreak. He told her about pizza and old cartoons, about his younger sister who joined the terraforming corps, about how he'd almost died on Xylos 7 when a plasma grenade took out his squad. She listened with an intensity that felt like physical touch. One evening, as twin moons rose over the spire, Corin found her standing alone on the obsidian balcony, gazing at the distant glow of rebel-held cities on the horizon. Her silhouette was sharp against the star-strewn sky, regal and solitary. "They say I must marry," she said without turning, "to secure an alliance. The Crithian prince has offered his hand, and a fleet of warships." Corin's chest tightened. "And what do you say?" "I say I will not trade my autonomy for a false peace," she replied, finally facing him. Her eyes held a storm. "But the council grows impatient. They see you as a weakness, a human with no title, no army, no bloodline." "I'm not trying to be anything," Corin said. "Just staying alive." She stepped closer. "You saved my life. In our culture, that creates a bond deeper than oaths, deeper than treaties." She reached out, hesitated, then gently touched his cheek with fingertips cool as river stones. "But I will not ask you to stay if it endangers you." Before he could respond, alarms blared through the palace. Red emergency lights flared to life along the corridors. A voice crackled over the biocoms. "Intruders in the West Spire. Hostiles confirmed. Crithian mercenaries." Lyrana's expression hardened into battle readiness. "Stay here," she ordered. "No," Corin said, already moving toward the armory alcove nearby. He grabbed a pulse pistol and a field medkit, old instincts kicking in. "I've got your back." She didn't argue. Together, they raced through the palace's crystalline passages, the sound of gunfire echoing ahead. They found the mercenaries, 6 heavily armored Crithians, engaged with palace guards near the Vault of Ancestors. Corrin didn't fire to kill. He targeted joints, power cores, weapons. He'd seen too much death. But when one mercenary lunged at Lorana with a neural disruptor, Corrin tackled him, taking a glancing blow to the ribs that left him gasping. Lorana fought like liquid lightning, graceful, lethal, every movement precise. She disarmed two attackers with nothing but a ceremonial dagger and a ribbon of energy coiled around her wrist. Within minutes, the fight was over. The surviving mercenaries were bound in stasis cuffs. Back in the throne room, bruised but unbroken, Lorana dismissed her advisors with a wave. Only Corrin remained. She sank onto the steps of her throne, breathing heavily, a shallow cut bleeding along her temple. Without a word, Corrin knelt beside her, opening his medkit. He cleaned the wound with antiseptic foam, applied a dermal patch. His hands were steady, though his heart hammered. "You didn't have to fight," she said softly. "I didn't have to do a lot of things," he replied, meeting her eyes. "But here I am." For the first time, she smiled. A real smile, warm and luminous, like dawn breaking over an alien sea. "Corrin Vale," she murmured. "What am I going to do with you?" He almost said something foolish. Something like, "Marry me?" But he bit it back. He wasn't a prince. He was just a man who knew how to spot poison and patch up wounds. Yet Lorana seemed to hear the unspoken words anyway. She reached for his hand, lacing her cool blue fingers through his. "The feast of binding is not over," she said. "There is another ritual, one rarely performed. The bond of shared breath, where two souls witness each other's truth and choose, freely, to walk the same path." Corrin's breath caught. "That sounds permanent." "It is," she said, "but only if both say yes." Before he could answer, a messenger burst in, panting. "Your Majesty, the Crithian fleet has crossed the neutral border. They're demanding your surrender, or they'll bombard the capital." Lorana rose, her expression shifting back to steel. But she didn't let go of Corrin's hand. "Then let them come," she said. "We will meet them not with fear, but with unity." In the days that followed, the palace became a fortress. Corrin, to his own surprise, found himself advising military strategy, not because he was a tactician, but because he understood human unpredictability, and the Crithians used human mercenaries. He suggested feints, decoys, psychological operations. Lorana listened, adapted, trusted him. And through it all, she kept his hand in hers whenever they walked the halls, a silent declaration that defied centuries of tradition. One night, during a rare lull in the siege preparations, they stood on the highest balcony, watching the distant flashes of orbital skirmishes light up the sky like silent thunderstorms. "Do you ever regret coming here?" she asked. Corrin thought of Earth, the smell of wet pavement, the sound of his sister's laughter, the taste of real coffee. Then he looked at her. The way her white hair caught the starlight, the quiet strength in her posture, the way she'd protected him even when he didn't ask. "No," he said, "because here, I found something worth fighting for." She leaned into him, just slightly. "And what is that?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he turned and kissed her, gently, carefully, as if she might shatter. But she didn't. She kissed him back, her lips cool and soft, her hands cradling his face like something precious. When they pulled apart, her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "The bond of shared breath," she whispered. "Will you say yes?" Corrin smiled. "Only if you promise not to feed me any suspicious fungus." She laughed, a sound like chimes in a solar wind, and for the first time the weight of her crown seemed lighter. But the war wasn't over. The Crithian fleet still loomed. And somewhere, in the shadows of the palace, traitors waited. Yet in that moment, with her hand in his and the stars burning above, Corrin knew one truth with absolute certainty. He would stand beside her, not as a savior or a spy, but as a partner. As a man who had whispered, "Don't eat that food," and, in doing so, had changed the fate of two worlds. And as the first beams of dawn painted the spire in gold and violet, Queen Lorana and Corrin Vale began to plan, not just for battle, but for a future neither had dared imagine. A future where love, not bloodline, ruled. where kindness was strength, where a human medic and an alien queen could build something new from the ruins of old wars. The story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. The siege tightened like a noose in the weeks that followed. The Crithian fleet, now numbering over 200 warships, formed a blockade around Valar's orbital ring, cutting off supply lines and jamming all long-range comms. From the surface, the sky turned bruised and artificial. Constant flares of plasma fire lit the upper atmosphere, and the distant thunder of ship-to-ship combat became the planet's new heartbeat. Inside the celestial spire, tension coiled through every corridor. Rations were halved. Lights dimmed to conserve power. Even the ever-blooming biovines lining the palace walls began to wilt under the strain of redirected energy. Yet in the heart of it all, something unexpected flourished. Corrin and Lorana began spending their nights not in separate quarters, but in the quiet chamber, a small, circular room deep within the spire's oldest wing, lined with sound-dampening moss and warmed by geothermal vents. There, far from the eyes of courtiers and spies, they spoke without titles. She told him about her childhood, how she'd hidden in the library vaults to avoid state tutors, how she'd once released all the ceremonial sky serpents during her coronation rehearsal just to watch them spiral into the clouds. He told her about Earth winters, about building snowmen with his sister, about the first time he'd seen an alien ship land in Nairobi, a sight that had made him cry from sheer wonder. Their bond deepened in silence as much as in speech. Sometimes they'd sit for hours, shoulders touching, watching tactical holomaps flicker in the dim light. Other times they'd argue, fiercely, passionately, over whether to negotiate or strike first. But they always listened, always compromised, and always held each other's hands when the weight of command threatened to crush them. One evening, as Corrin patched a fresh graze on Lorana's forearm, a souvenir from an ambush in the lower archives, he noticed something strange. Beneath her blue skin, near her collarbone, a faint pattern of glowing glyphs had begun to appear, pulsing softly in time with her breath. "What's that?" he asked, gently tracing the light with his fingertips. She didn't flinch. "The bond of shared breath has already begun," she said quietly. "It activates when two souls choose each other, even before the formal rite. My body is marking you, invisible to others, but real to me. And to you." Corrin stared. "So, we're already bonded?" "In spirit, yes," she replied, her violet eyes holding his. "The ceremony would only make it law. But the truth is already written in my cells." He swallowed. "Does it hurt?" "Only when you leave the room," she admitted, so softly he almost missed it. He didn't leave that night. Meanwhile, the war grew more desperate. A Crithian commando team infiltrated the aqueduct tunnels beneath the palace, poisoning the primary water reservoir with a slow-acting neuroinhibitor. Dozens of guards collapsed before Corrin, drawing on his medic training, identified the symptoms. He worked for 36 straight hours, mixing antidotes from stored botanicals and jury-rigging filtration units from scavenged drone parts. Lorana never left his side, translating Velari biochemistry texts aloud while administering injections with steady hands. When the last patient stabilized, Corrin slumped against a wall, exhausted. Without a word, Lorana gathered him into her arms and carried him. Yes, carried him, her slender frame deceptively strong, to the quiet chamber. She laid him on the sleeping pallet, draped a thermal blanket over him, and sat beside him, stroking his hair until he slept. But peace was a luxury they couldn't afford for long. A breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A captured Crithian pilot, young and terrified, who confessed under gentle questioning. Corrin refused to allow torture, that the hegemony wasn't acting alone. They'd been supplied with Velari biometric codes, palace schematics, even the recipe for the sovereign sustenance. The traitor was inside the spire, high-ranking, possibly on the royal council itself. Lorana convened a secret tribunal in the Chamber of Echoes, where sound was absorbed by living stone, ensuring no transmissions could leak. Only 5 were present: Lorana, Corrin, the royal guard captain, the chief archivist, and High Counselor Vexus, a stern, silver-scaled elder who had served 3 queens. Corrin watched Vexus closely. The counselor's breathing was too steady, his eyes too calm. When Lorana revealed they traced the toxin's molecular signature to a batch of moonpetal grown in the palace's own greenhouse. Access restricted to only 3 individuals. Vexus's left eye twitched, just once. Later that night, Corrin followed him. He trailed the counselor through the lower archives, past rows of crystalline data spires humming with ancestral memories, until Vexus entered a sealed chamber labeled Thermal Vault, authorized personnel only. Corrin waited, then slipped in behind him. What he saw froze his blood. Vexus stood before a hidden comms array, transmitting data to an encrypted Crithian frequency. On the screen, schematics of the spire's shield generators, annotated with weak points. "You're selling your own people," Corrin said, stepping into the light. Vexus spun, eyes wide with fury. "You meddlesome ape. You don't understand what's at stake. The Crithians promised to spare the civilians if we hand over the queen. They'll glass the cities otherwise. And you believed them?" Corrin scoffed. "They glassed Xylos 7 after the surrender." Before Vexus could respond, Corrin lunged, not to attack, but to smash the comms console with a fire axe he'd brought. Sparks flew. Alarms blared. Guards burst in seconds later. Vexus was arrested, screaming treason against the queen for consorting with primitives. The fallout was immediate. Half the council demanded Corrin's exile. "He has no standing. He manipulates her," they cried. But Lorana silenced them with a single decree. "He saw what you refused to. He saved us again. And from this moment, Corrin Vale is my chosen consort. His word carries my authority." The court reeled. A human, as royal consort? It was unprecedented, scandalous, and, to many, terrifying. But Lorana didn't care. That same day, she summoned Corrin to the Hall of Starlight Mirrors, where the ceiling reflected the exact configuration of the night sky on the day of her birth. "I won't ask you again," she said, standing before him in a simple gown of woven sky kelp, her white hair unbound. "The bond of shared breath is offered, not as queen to subject, but as Lorana to Corrin. Will you walk this path with me? Through war, through peace, through whatever stars may fall." Corrin didn't hesitate. "Yes." She smiled, then pressed her forehead to his. A warm light bloomed between them, golden and violet intertwining. The glyphs on her skin flared brightly, then settled into a permanent, intricate pattern that now also appeared faintly on Corrin's wrist, glowing only when they touched. It wasn't magic. It was biology, a Velari neural resonance, activated by mutual consent and deep emotional alignment. From this moment, they would share dreams, feel each other's pain, sense danger through the other's instincts. Their bond was real, official, unbreakable. Yet the war pressed on. The Crithians, enraged by Vexus's capture and the failed poisoning, launched an all-out assault. Their flagship, the Doomsinger, descended into low orbit, deploying orbital lances aimed at the spire's main spire. Lorana ordered the evacuation of the capital city. Millions fled through subterranean transit tubes to the mountain refuges. But she refused to leave the palace. "If the spire falls, Valor falls," she said. "I stay." Corrin stayed too. Together, they coordinated the defense. Using intel from Vexus's files, they rerouted power to reinforce the shield harmonics at the precise frequencies the Crithians had targeted. Corrin suggested deploying decoy energy signatures, old Terran trick from the Martian skirmishes, and Lorana's engineers made it work using harmonic drones. The Doomsinger fired. The sky split open with white fire, but the spire held. In the chaos, Corrin noticed something strange on the tactical display. The Crithian flagship wasn't retreating. It was powering up a secondary core. Something massive hidden in its underbelly. A planet cracker warhead. One blast, and Valor's crust would fracture. Billions would die. "There's only one way," Lorana said, her voice hollow. "I must board the Doomsinger. Destroy the core from inside." "You'll die." Corrin grabbed her arms. "There's got to be another way." "There isn't." She cupped his face. "But I won't go alone." Before he could protest, she activated her personal skiff. a sleek, needle-like vessel kept for emergencies. Corin scrambled in after her. No argument, no goodbyes, just two people bonded, flying into the maw of death. The journey through the battle-torn sky was brutal. Enemy fighters swarmed them. Corin manned the skiff's pulse turrets, his aim uncanny, guided by flashes of Lorana's instincts through their bond. They breached the Doomsinger's hull near the engineering bay, docking with a bone-jarring clang. Inside, it was a nightmare of red lighting, clanging metal, and shrieking alarms. They moved fast, using Lorana's knowledge of Crithian ship design and Corin's combat medic stealth tactics. Avoiding patrols, disabling cameras, setting small charges to create diversions. They reached the core chamber. The planet cracker pulsed like a monstrous heart, encased in containment fields. Disabling it required simultaneous overrides at 3 terminals, 2 at opposite ends of the chamber, 1 in the center. "I'll take the center," Lorana said. "It's the most exposed." "No," Corin said. "I'll do it. You're the queen. Valor needs you. And you think I don't need you?" Her voice cracked. "Corin." He kissed her, hard and fast. "I'm not dying today. But if I do, tell our kids I liked blue hair." Then he ran. He reached the central terminal just as Crithian Marines stormed the chamber. Corin worked the console with one hand, firing his pistol with the other. He took a plasma bolt to the shoulder, cried out, but kept typing. Through their bond, he felt Lorana's terror, her focus, her love, all pouring into him like strength. The core began to destabilize. "Go!" he yelled over comms. Lorana hesitated only a second before sprinting back to the skiff. Corin followed, limping, bleeding, but alive. They launched just as the Doomsinger's core went critical. The explosion lit the sky like a second sun. The Crithian fleet, leaderless and demoralized, retreated. Valor was saved. In the aftermath, Corin lay in the palace infirmary, drifting in and out of consciousness. Lorana never left his side. When he finally woke, she was asleep in a chair beside him, her head resting on his bed, her hand clasped tightly around his. He squeezed gently. Her eyes fluttered open. "You're alive," she whispered, tears spilling down her blue cheeks. "Told you," he rasped. "Didn't get to meet those kids yet." She laughed through her tears. "About that." She placed his hand on her lower abdomen. "The bond, it does more than share dreams." Corin's breath caught. "You're with child," she confirmed, her smile radiant. "Half human, half Velari. The first of a new line." He stared, overwhelmed. "Are you sure it's safe?" "Our biology. The medics say the bond stabilized our genetic resonance. It's rare but possible. And wanted." He pulled her into a careful embrace, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. "Then we've got a lot to build," he murmured. "A nursery. A school where human and Velari kids learn together. Maybe a little garden on the balcony where we grow earth tomatoes and Velari moon petals side by side." Lorana rested her head on his chest. "And peace. We'll earn it," he said. "Every day." Outside, the twin suns rose over a war-scarred but healing world. The celestial spire stood tall, its crystal walls catching the light, no longer just a symbol of ancient power, but of something new, something hopeful. Corin Vale, human medic turned consort, and Queen Lorana of Valor, blue-skinned and white-haired, held each other in the quiet dawn, their intertwined hands glowing softly with the light of a bond forged in poison, tested in fire, and destined to bloom into a future neither had dared dream of. But both would now build, together. In the season that followed the war's end, Corin and Lorana were married beneath the twin suns in the palace's sky garden, where vines bloomed with flowers that chimed like laughter. The ceremony was simple yet sacred. No grand fanfare, just close allies, rescued orphans, and soldiers from both human and Velari forces standing as witnesses. They exchanged vows not of dominion, but of partnership, to heal, to listen, and to build rather than conquer. Within a year, their first child was born, a daughter named Serial, with skin the soft hue of twilight blue and hair like spun silver. yet her laughter echoed Corin's earth-born warmth. She was followed by twins 2 years later, Kaelin and Mira, one with Corin's hazel eyes and the other with Lorana's violet gaze, both endlessly curious and fiercely kind. The palace, once cold with tradition, filled with the pitter-patter of small feet, crayon drawings stuck to bio walls, and bedtime stories blending Earth folklore with Veilari star myths. Corin traded his field kit for a teaching role at the newly founded Unity Academy, where human and alien children learned side by side. Lorana reformed the council, dissolving old hierarchies and inviting representatives from every species in the quadrant. The sovereign sustenance was replaced with a shared meal open to all, a symbol that nourishment, like peace, was meant to be offered, not hoarded. Decades passed. Their children grew, married partners of many species, and gave them grandchildren who spoke 5 languages and played games that mixed hopscotch with zero-gravity tag. The war became a lesson in history texts, not a wound in their hearts. On quiet evenings, Corin and Lorana still walked the obsidian balcony, hands clasped, their bond glyphs glowing faintly in the dark. They never forgot the day he whispered, "Don't eat that food." Not because it saved a queen, but because it began a life neither had expected, but both cherished completely. They grew old together in a sunlit villa outside the rebuilt capital, surrounded by gardens, laughter, and the peaceful hum of a galaxy learning to coexist. And when their time finally came, they left behind not just heirs, but a legacy. That kindness, courage, and love, no matter how unexpected, could bridge even the widest stars.